Our students should not be afraid to go abroad. You should not be afraid to lead groups abroad. But my job is to foster a healthy paranoia so that so that you can make well-considered decisions about your risk management when you go abroad. How many of you were in the room 2 years ago? Wow, you came back. All right, well, I will try not to be overly repetitive. And there's a number of new things that have developed in the last couple of years. One of those new things is that there has been an incident database, a pilot program championed by the Forum for Education Abroad. However, we still do not know what the epidemiology is for study abroad to any great degree. We don't know what the factors are that determine the kind, quality, and distribution of illnesses and injuries that take place in our programs. We can make some guesses based on some of the State Department data, the data that comes from the travel medicine industry, etc., and some limited efforts within study abroad. There's somewhere between 25 and 100 deaths a year in study abroad, which is horrendous if it happens in your program or it's your child that dies on a program. However, statistically, that's not very significant. Very few of us will ever be involved in a death. Most of us are going to be involved in sports injuries, misbehavior incidents, mental health events, lost passports, logistical snafus, etc., etc. But we need to prepare for all of the incidents across the spectrum. How many of you are administrators here? How many of you are trip leading faculty? Of the trip leading faculty, how many of you are going to high income countries? Europe, Western Europe, Australia, Japan? Okay. How many of you are leading trips to low and middle income countries? Okay. How many of you are leading trips shorter than 10 days? Just a couple of you. Longer than 10 days? Longer than a month? Longer than 2 months? A couple of semesters. Longer than a semester? Okay, semester. How many of you are fascinated by risk management in education? A few of you, excellent. Well, risk management in education abroad becomes much more interesting when we have incidents, because incidents generate questions. And those questions generate larger questions, which generate the largest questions, which are, what's the best way to navigate risk internationally? What do we need to be able to do? What are the knowledge, skills, perspectives that we need to be able to bring to bear? And what are the obstacles and challenges? Most people that are focused on risk management tend to be somewhat pessimistic, which is true of me, so I am going to start with some of the obstacles and challenges. Gone are the days when people put on their websites and in the front of their brochures that safety is our highest priority. All of our legal counsels have said, you better take that down unless you really mean it, and if you really mean it, you're not going abroad. And if safety was your second highest priority after going abroad, you would have a trauma team following your group around everywhere they went, and nobody could afford that. So safety is not our highest priority. It's one of a number of agendas, and we are, by necessity, managing that agenda with very real limitations, money, time, and personnel. Management stretch is a part of our culture. If your job seemed really reasonable, either it would get cut or they would add some responsibilities into it. It's like, speaking of adventure education, if you bring a really big backpack, you fill it all the way to the top. If you bring a smaller backpack, it's a lot lighter. You just fill it up as much as you can. That's what most of our jobs are like. Also in that culture of education abroad, we don't have a tradition of sharing our stories. Up until Google Alerts came out, you rarely heard about a fatality in study abroad. Now you can see them if you set your dial for that on a daily basis. Not fatalities on a daily basis, but events on a daily basis. Right? We don't have a tradition of analyzing our stories, sharing the lessons learned. I've always said we're not data-based, but we're not really experientially based either. We don't tend to learn from that. And the Risk Management Conference Day, the inaugural Standards Institute for the forum, was the first time that we spent an entire day with multiple concurrent sessions looking at risk management topics. And it was sold out, standing room only, and the quality of the presentations was very, very good. We have underdeveloped standards. I was on part of the committee that spent the entire last year revamping the whole standards, and we got into it with a group of people, and they shredded them very well. And we're back at the drawing board, starting to email around, and going, okay, what's the next way to take a swipe at this? But that makes it very hard for us to navigate. We have a lack of incident data. The complexity of the topic is enormous. You need to know about insurance. You need to know about mental health. You need to know about language and culture. You need to know about medicine. And you need to understand all of those things on 25 different levels. You need to know about the laws in other countries, the insurance in other countries, what's lost in translation when you interact with another medical system overseas. Safety and liability are usually very, very complementary. When you reduce your liability, you're usually increasing your safety, and vice versa. But however, there are a number of instances where that's not true. Your legal counsel will tell you don't screen the students. I would say that is going to make it a lot less safe. People are very concerned about FERPA laws, so they don't want people out in the field to know what the information was that was gleaned from screening. So you out in the field have a Cracker Jack box. You find out about your students as their problems unfold. That is good for liability if you're in court, not so good for safety. In terms of staff training, an argument that now is somewhat big in study abroad is, should we train our staff in first aid? How many of you have first aid training? Good on you that have it. Those of you who don't have it should get it. The argument is the same as the argument was in Outward Bound in 1980. If we train our staff in first aid, then they'll be held to a higher standard of care. Our liability exposure will be greater. That is not the case, but that's the argument that we're still having. There are institutional alignment issues. In a lot of universities, there are 25 different departments sending students abroad. They don't coordinate, they don't share resources, they invent the wheel within their own departments, which does not help very much. One of the things that you guys have that is very good is you have a centrally located dispersion. So when calls come from the field, they go to your police department, and then they get shunted to where they need to go. And there's an evolving hazard landscape, particularly around political violence, terrorism violence, crime, and diseases. And when we look at standards, you can see why it's not why everybody is doing different things. Our programs are very, very different. If you go down to who, what, where, when, why, how, and how long of our programs, if you change any variable significantly within there, you have a very different program with a very different hazard landscape. We're all dealing with those practical issues. Institutions might have different ones at the top of the list, but we're all dealing with them. We're all dealing with those objectives. We all have a lot of constituents whose needs we need to meet. And we have a host of different decision makers who, by virtue of charisma or by the title of their position, may sway the decision making in a particular way, very different from a similar program. And then the bottom line there, whose responsibility is safety? It's an interesting philosophical argument that takes place throughout the field. We all want our students to be responsible for it, but we're all aware that if our students get clobbered, they and their families are going to try to make our institutions responsible for it. And then study abroad departments everywhere are trying to make their trip leading faculty responsible for most of the safety. And I always look at that and think, if you have a French professor leading a trip to Morocco, they are required to sign something saying, I will be responsible for all the safety aspects and informing my students of all the safety aspects of everything having to do with going to Morocco. I question, does the French professor really know that much about risk management to where they can do that? But they have to sign a gazillion documents, so they sign that and they say, sure. But in the event of an untoward incident, they're going to say, I'm a French professor. How would I know about all that?